On All Hallows Eve, the veil between the living and the dead is at its weakest. At this moment, the spirits of the dead can haunt the earth as they once did in life. But no one could anticipate that what was going to come back from the dead in the Halloween of 2025 was Nanotyrannus. I'm Reisuka, a real-life paleontologist with a PhD, but you can call me Dino Mommy. Or Dr. Dino Mommy if we're being formal. In this video, I'm going to explain how one of the most controversial genera of dinosaurs that was originally thought to be juvenile T-Rex was actually found to be a new genus and species of dinosaur once and for all. Our tale starts back in 1988. When Robert Bacher, Michael Williams, and Phil Curry redescribed the skull CMNH 7541, which was then known as Gorgosaurus lancensis, as a new genus and species, Nanotyrannus lancensis. The genus name is the union of the word nano, which means small or dwarf in Greek, with the word tyrant, which means king or ruler in Latin. Now, this is something that's relatively common in paleontology because as we find new fossils and discover more about dinosaurs and learn more about them and their evolutionary relationships, we do have to change their names to reflect this new knowledge. And these researchers believed that they had found enough differences between Nanotyrannus and Gorgosaurus anatomically to name Nanotyrannus a new species and genus, which is normally not a huge deal. But the species name lancensis is precisely the reason why this paper was so controversial. The name lancensis means from the lance formation, and at the time, the authors thought that this formation was part of the Hell Creek Formation, which is where this skull was actually from. And Hell Creek has another tyrant that rules over it, Tyrannosaurus rex, of course. Now, a lot of scientists thought that a more compelling explanation for finding a smaller tyrannosaurid in the Hell Creek Formation was that this was a juvenile T-Rex and not a new species and genus of tyrannosaur from the same family. Their reasoning was that a lot of the anatomical differences presented between Nanotyrannus and T-Rex could have been due to differentiation among different individuals or because of different stages of development in T-Rex that were being reflected in Nanotyrannus if it was a juvenile T-Rex. And for the longest time, while both sides had validity in their arguments, we could not find a Nanotyrannus that was a full adult. In other words, we couldn't find a skeleton of Nanotyrannus that was done growing yet. So no matter where you stood in the discussion, neither side could be sure that they were correct. And that's when the debate started to get heated. And when I say that it was a heated debate, I am not exaggerating. I mean, this is paleontology we're talking about after all. When have we ever had a nice, quiet, or chill debate? Can't think of one. Just to show you how heated this debate got, George Blassing, who was a writer for the show Jurassic Fight, actually wrote an episode about Nanotyrannus fighting a T-Rex. Only this year in 2025, after the Nanotyrannus debate was fully settled, did he feel comfortable sharing on Facebook the fact that many paleontologists, and let me add, most of these paleontologists are very high up, some of the top paleontologists in the world, they were sending him emails full of personal attacks and slurs just because he dared to put the name Nanotyrannus on the big screen. This is something that unfortunately happens all the time in paleontology. I've experienced it a lot, and if you get far into paleontology, you will experience it. But I have to stress that this behavior is not okay. And in fact, it's actually contributing to the fact that paleontology as a field is dying because there's just this competitive nature around paleontology and people are not focusing on data and wanting to actually accumulate real knowledge and learn about the real science of paleontology. And instead they're so caught up in their egos and literally personally attacking people over data that actually turns out to be correct most of the time. Trust me, I would know. This has happened to me over and over. I even once spent 2 years having a paper just waiting to be published because I had to respond to each and every comment that a reviewer left on my paper, and 80% of them were just personal attacks. Not even about my research, just personal attacks on me as a person. And that is just not okay. No matter how hard you disagree with someone over dinosaurs or animals or science, whatever it is never okay to personally attack someone over that. And I just can't stress that enough. Nothing is worth that. It's not professional, and it's actually harming our science. And it needs to stop if we want this field to survive, and if we want science to really survive and thrive in general. And just a final note to that, it's not something that paleontologists and scientists do to each other. It's also something that I see happening all the time in my comments here on YouTube and my other platforms. And people even use me misspeaking or getting something slightly off just to like personally attack me, claim I'm not a scientist, etc., etc. Again, this is not okay. And you know, whether you're a scientist or whether you're someone who's just enthusiastic about these prehistoric animals, it's never okay to just personally attack someone, harass them, or abuse them over any aspect of science, but especially over animals that are literally dead, literally extinct. Remember, you are harassing a real living person over this. Okay, so keep that in mind. We want to build a new future where science is actually focused on the science and learning the truth about the natural world, because that's really cool and really exciting. And there really, truly is no reason to attack people over it. And that's only going to hinder our discovery. And in fact, I would say that healthy debate is really important in science because we have to be able to talk to each other and express different opinions in order to come up with the best hypotheses and the best conclusions from our data. And if someone is just continuously personally attacking you and abusing you, eventually you're just not going to be able to talk or communicate with that person, and vice versa. And all of our science suffers for it because we can't just bounce ideas off of each other. You know, if someone is abusing you and attacking you, you can't safely bounce ideas off of each other. After a while, it just starts to become really impossible to work with that person. And paleontology is really one of the fields that's suffering from that the most because there is just such a small handful of us, and most of us don't talk to each other because most people in the field refuse to put personal differences aside and just focus on the science. So, you know, yeah, I went on for a little long there about that, but honestly, this is like one of the biggest issues in paleontology and science in general today. So for all of my aspiring paleontologists out there and just people who want to learn more about dinosaurs and talk about them, I definitely want you all to be aware of that and thinking about that moving forward. Anyway, back to Nanotyrannus. So what changed this big debate, and why did Nanotyrannus come back from the dead? Well, on this All Hallows Eve, the dead really did tell new tales. The first dead to haunt the living was called Jane, formerly known as BMRP 2002.4.1. She is a juvenile tyrannosaurid skull that is much more complete than the one that was used to originally describe Nanotyrannus. But sadly, because she was just a juvenile and therefore not an adult, not done growing yet, the paleontologists that believed that Nanotyrannus didn't exist argued that Jane would have transformed into a T-Rex if she had the ability to live longer before becoming fossilized. However, in the spirit of Halloween, the haunting that would finally close this debate was named Bloody Mary. In a ranch somewhere in Montana, someone turned around in the mirror 3 times and called her name, and in 2006, she appeared in the fossil that is now famously named the dueling dinosaurs. This is a fossil where a complete tyrannosaur, Bloody Mary herself, is preserved fighting a triceratops in an eternal battle. Now, if you ask me, closing such a heated debate with a fossil that is preserving eternal combat is the best poetic justice. This fossil was prepared as soon as it became public knowledge, and Robert Bacher was included as a scientific advisor for the team. And the team concluded that Bloody Mary was also a member of the genus Nanotyrannus. Now, this was not published in a peer-reviewed paper at the time, but it was published in videos that the preparators and researchers made, and I'll link to those in the description. And they were released at that time. But hold on to your butts, because this is not when the debate was settled. There's a reason that this wasn't published upon discovery. The dueling dinosaurs were found on private land, and according to United States law, any mineral that's found on someone's property belongs to the owners of that property. Since in Montana's law, all fossils are labeled as mineral property, the owners of the fossil were landowners Lige and Mary Ann Murray. And the Black Hill Institute, which is a private fossil collecting company, was working on the fossil. So no museum, university, or any kind of public, government-funded, or otherwise non-profit institution was working on this fossil or had access to it. If you're not catching what I'm saying, Black Hill basically let paleontologists know that the fossil existed and how important it was, but they didn't allow anyone to study or publish it so they could raise its market value, just like any company would with its products. So from 2006 to 2020, the only thing stopping the world from being able to research the most complete skeleton of a tyrannosaur ever found was the fact that this company could not sell it for profit. Now, to us paleontologists and people who love dinosaurs and value science, that can sound cold and that can sound wrong. But the reality is that people have different goals, and that us paleontologists have to work with private investors and companies, and sometimes even with the black market. And museums do this all the time. Paleontologists do this all the time. And the reason for it is because fossils are extremely rare. Less than 1% of all living things on Earth even become fossils in the first place. And dinosaurs, especially theropod dinosaurs, things like T-Rex, Velociraptor, etc., bird-like dinosaurs, you know, a lot of those dinosaurs have hollow bones. And so they are some of the rarest fossils to ever find because their bones are so fragile that often they don't get fossilized. They just kind of get crushed before they can get fossilized. So we do have to be willing to work with different people and different sectors of the world in order to acquire these things. And that's just what it is. For me, of course, I believe that these things are treasures that belong to the citizens of the world and that everyone should be able to view these things and study these things in an ideal world. But we don't live in an ideal world. And as paleontologists and as scientists, we have to be able to work together. And that kind of brings me to one of the other main reasons that paleontology as a field is dying is, again, you know, people aren't willing to work together, not just in terms of discussing science and letting ego get in the way of that, but also in terms of being more willing to work with private institutions and, you know, the black market. And it probably sounds weird for me to be saying that, but it's just true. It's something you have to do, especially when you're working with other countries internationally. It's just something that you have to do sometimes, and it's common practice. Paleontology isn't the only field that does this. You know, archaeology is another field that does this because most people in the world do view a lot of these things that we study as objects, as commodities. Maybe not most people, but you know, they do have that commodity aspect to them. It's kind of like if you're a gemologist and you study diamonds, well, you might really be interested in the scientific properties of diamonds, but You know, most of us see diamonds as jewelry, right? We see diamonds as an object we can buy. We don't really think about the scientific properties of diamonds, how they were formed, what that can teach us about geology and blah, blah, blah. I mean, a lot of people view dinosaurs, fossils, artifacts, you name it, the same way as objects because money does run a lot of our world. At least a large part of our world, and we need to be realistic about that. And if you are at the top of the field in paleontology, you know that very well, and you have worked in with all three of those sectors at some point. And yeah, again, in an ideal world, would we need to view these things as commodities? No, but that's just the reality of where we're at. And I think we need to be more willing, especially to work with private companies, with private donors, because most of the large skeletons and the more complete skeletons are owned by private donors because, again, these things are seen and sold as commodities a lot of the time. And I don't really see a problem if there's a private donor that's willing to, you know, let us research what they have or maybe loan out what they have occasionally to put it on display for the public. I think these are great solutions that could be put in place. And I think especially with the state of funding for science and institutions right now, I mean, institutions like museums and universities are losing funding in droves. We were already underpaid really as scientists for the amount of work that we do because our jobs are not just 9 to 5, they really are 24/7 jobs. And on top of that, we always are expected to get funding from the government and other nonprofits, but mostly from the government to be able to complete our research. Now, that's part of why I became an influencer because I wanted to be able to fund my research individually and not have to rely on external funding because I saw that funding was dwindling. And now we're at this point where the funding for science in general is very scarce. I mean, even the funding for more necessary sciences like NASA is, you know, it's dwindling a lot. And so when it comes to fields like paleontology, we're going to get even less funding. And we already had to work very hard for our funding because paleontology isn't really seen as, you know, a field that's super necessary, even though it can have implications for learning about how to conserve endangered species and for human medicine. But for the most part, it's not really seen as an essential science. And so there's not really, you know, there already wasn't great funding for paleontology, but now it's just so low and universities are even losing their instruments, losing positions, museums are not able to rehire positions. And so I think we're just entering this time where we really need to be willing to work with private companies and private collectors and investors if we're going to survive. Anyway, back to Nanotyrannus. Man, Nanotyrannus is really pointing out a lot of the problems in paleontology. So after they prepared the dueling dinosaurs fossil, this fossil was kind of moved from warehouse to warehouse, auction to auction, and kind of locked away from researchers' eyes, like I was saying. This only changed after Montana resolved an issue between the current owners of the property and the latest owners of the property, who are claiming that they owned part of the dueling dinosaur fossil because they originally owned the property. The court basically ruled in favor of the dueling dinosaurs not being seen as a mineral anymore, and therefore the current owners of the property could go ahead and sell off the fossil without having to have a permit from the previous owners. And ultimately, this allowed the dueling dinosaurs to be sold to the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. And even with all of this, the transaction was not that simple. Basically, a nonprofit organization had to get help from local investors to help the museum buy the fossil and finally have it be researched by paleontologists. See what I mean about the lack of funding? Now, finally, we can talk about the paper that brought Nanotyrannus back from the dead. But before I get to that, each video that I create for you on here takes a long time to research, write, film, and edit. So why don't you go ahead, click like and subscribe, and send this video to your friends so that more people can learn about dinosaurs, see this video, and learn about the latest dinosaur science from a real-life paleontologist. Thank you so much, my dino nugget. Now, let's learn about the paper that settled the Nanotyrannus debate once and for all. Lindsay Zano and James Napoli published the first complete description of Bloody Mary on the day before Halloween of this year, October 30th, 2025. And by comparing the anatomy of Bloody Mary to that of T-Rex, they showed that it was literally impossible for T-Rex and Nanotyrannus to be the same species. Now, if you thought the Nanotyrannus drama would stop here, you'd be dead wrong. The drama never ends in paleontology. It's basically like we have our own reality show, but with a bunch of dead animals as our co-stars. So the reveal of Nanotyrannus was supposed to happen in November this year, actually on November 12th at the Society of Vertebrate Paleontology conference, but the New York Times published a journalistic article on the new findings on October 30th, and that pressured Nature to release the peer-reviewed but unedited manuscript about 3 hours after the New York Times article came out. Okay, so you must be tired of all this drama, right? So let's get to the real science and learn about what Nanotyrannus has that is so different from T-Rex. One of the most important differences is that Bloody Mary has a vestigial third finger, while all members of the genus Tyrannosaurus only have 2. And losing fingers while growing from a teenager into adult is not something that we see in any dinosaur or in any vertebrate animal for that matter. Also, Bloody Mary has 17 teeth in its jaw, while T-Rex only has 12. And again, we do not see tyrannosaurs lose teeth as they get older. As if that wasn't enough, the maxillary sinus of Nanotyrannus is much shorter than that of T-Rex. And the holes that make up the pneumatic sinus along the roof of the mouth area of Nanotyrannus are different from those of T-Rex, which means that for one animal to turn into the other, it would literally die if it tried. But most importantly, Bloody Mary was definitely an adult when she died. By making a cut in her femur and performing histology, the researchers could look at the growth rings inside her bones. And these rings revealed her approximate age and how much she had grown each year. Lo and behold, these rings showed that she was 20 years old at the time of death. And the rings that were at the outermost part of her bone, basically the rings that were laid down right before she died, were much smaller than the inner rings, showing that she was an adult that was slowing down her growth. If all of the other evidence wasn't convincing enough, this is the proof that Nanotyrannus is a different genus and species from T-Rex. And now Jane could also be described properly as a Nanotyrannus and not a T-Rex. So researchers could compare her to the original skull that gave Nanotyrannus its name, and they both were given the names Nanotyrannus lancensis. But do you remember Jane? She's not like the others. Jane is a little bit bigger than Bloody Mary, and since she was a juvenile, that's a sign that she could have grown to be even larger, although not nearly as large as the 4 tons of an adult T-Rex. She is still part of the Nanotyrannus genus because she shares a lot of similarities with Bloody Mary, but she is a new species of Nanotyrannus. Oh my god, Nanotyrannus, can you stop being controversial for 1 second? Of course you can't, because this is paleontology. So because of this, Jane was then reclassified as Nanotyrannus lethaeus, and the reasoning behind this name is pretty funny. Lethe was a river of Hades in the Greek world of the dead, or the underworld, and it was named the River of the Forgotten because anyone that would drink or bathe in the water would have all of their memories erased. Knowing this, lethaeus is a clever double pun from the authors. The first one that's more simple to get is that Jane was literally found in the Hell Creek Formation. The second one is a deeper reference. In Dante Alighieri's Divine Comedy, the Lethe River is described as the river that souls drink from in order to forget their old life and be ready to be reincarnated into their new life. And of course, that mirrors everything that these fossils went through and how their meaning and names changed over time. So now that we know that Nanotyrannus was real, what were they like and how did they live? The study suggests that Nanotyrrannids and Tyrannosaurids must have first diverged or separated from each other when what is now the United States was divided in half by a great inner sea called the Western Interior Seaway. This may have separated their ancestors, and then Nanotyrannus and its ancestors, after evolving in Appalachia, could have moved over to Laramidia during the late Cretaceous when the Western Interior Seaway started to disappear. But we definitely need more evidence to know whether this is how they actually dispersed and evolved across what is now North America. Nanotyrannus had a more slender build. They had weaker bite force, longer arms, and hind limbs that were more proportioned for speed. So they were probably pursuit predators that fed on prey that was too fast for Tyrannosaurus rex, meaning that the adult forms of Nanotyrannus probably wouldn't have competed too much with T-Rex for resources. However, they could have competed a bit with the juvenile forms of Tyrannosaurus. Speaking of juvenile Tyrannosaurus, now us paleontologists have a very difficult task, and that is to re-examine all of the fossils that were previously considered to be juvenile T-Rex, because some of those could actually be Nanotyrannus. So in the upcoming years, you should expect to see some changes in the way that we understand T-Rex and Nanotyrannus potentially. And that's all you need to know about Nanotyrannus. If you want to get the most in-depth coverage of paleontology from a real-life paleontologist, then make sure you hit like and subscribe for more.